Well, we talk a lot about taxes in economics, and the primary reason we talk about taxes is not to say whether they're good or bad, or right or wrong, or whatever you want to say about taxes as far as the nature of those things. We talk about taxes because taxes affect people's behavior. They change incentives. Now, when we look at the general tax model, one of the things that we notice is that when taxes get put in place, it divides the price. It puts a wedge between the price that the buyer pays and the price that the seller receives. In other words, in a market where there's a tax, there's not a single price, there are two prices. So we have the price the buyer pays, and we subtract the tax from that to get the price the seller receives. Okay, we see that in the model. We see that when you have a market with a tax in it, here's a demand curve, and here's a supply curve, and here's the equilibrium price. I'm just going to mark that PEQ. If there's a tax that's put in place, and let's say that there's a tax put on the seller, it doesn't really matter, the supply curve shifts to the left, and we end up with a price up here. This is the price that the buyer pays, PB, and we drop down to our supply curve and over to the price axis to get the price the seller receives. And the difference between those two prices is our tax. Now the question is, if we want to actually figure out what those numbers are, how do we do that? Well, that's what this particular lesson is all about. Finding those prices, the price the buyer pays and the price the seller gets, more formally than what we've been used to. So how does that work? Well, let's start off with the demand curve and a supply curve. Let's say that our demand curve takes the form, so this is D for demand. Our demand curve takes the form of A minus B times P. So P is the price. And our supply curve takes the form C minus D times P. I'm sorry, C plus D times P. So we have a demand curve and a supply curve. Now, we know that those two things need to be equal to each other in equilibrium. In other words, to get our equilibrium price, we set these two equations equal to each other. So we would have A minus BP equal to C plus DP. Great. That's the first step. The second step is we need to have some information about the tax. Well, we've got a lot of information about the tax already. We know that the price that the buyer pays, which will be PB, is equal to PS plus the tax. So here's our PS, here's our PB, the difference is the tax. So if we take PS, add the tax, we get up to PB. Okay, that's great. Now we've got this information on the tax, and we've got this information of setting demand equal to supply. Just need to add one little thing to this equation, because it looks like we have two P's that are the same, but they're not the same. The price in our demand equation is only the price for the buyer. So we're going to put a letter B beside that price. And the price in the seller's, in the supply curve is only the price the seller receives. So we're going to put an S next to that price. Now we can start to do some substitution to get down to the point where we can figure out with some specificity what these prices, this PB and this PS, actually are. So let's do that. And we'll keep this up here. We're going to take this information, we're going to substitute it into our equation. So we're going to have A minus B times this. Because the price the buyer pays is equal to the price the seller gets plus the tax. So we'll have B times PS plus T. I'm just going to use T to abbreviate for tax. And we're going to have that set equal to C plus D PS. Now we have one unknown price. That's the PS. And so let's rewrite this so that we can set things equal to each other. What we're going to do is we're going to bring all the PS's on this side, and we're going to bring everything else over here. So we will have A minus C, I did not distribute my negative sign there, so let's do that. So A minus C minus BT, and we're going to set that equal to D times PS plus, because we're going to bring this guy over to this side of the equal sign, B times PS. Now we want to get the PS's by themselves, so what we'll do is we'll take D plus B, factor that out, times PS, and now over on this side we'll have A minus C minus BT. We're going to divide each side through by D plus B, and here's what we end up with. We have A minus C minus BT over D plus B, and that equals PS. So, what did we just do? Here's what we did. We took this information, we took actually this graphical information and figured out what the price the seller is going to pay. A is the intercept from our demand equation. C is the intercept from our supply equation. B is the slope from our demand equation times T, the tax. D is the slope from the supply equation, and B is the slope, again, from the demand equation. When you have those numbers, if you're given those numbers, you just drop them into this little equation, calculate the price the seller pays, the seller receives. Now, to get the price the buyer pays, there's two things you can do. One, you can just take the tax and add it to this. That's the easy way. Or you could work your way through the math, and what you would determine is you'd have a different kind of equation, just a slightly different look to your equation. You would end up with this. You would have A minus C plus D times T over D plus B, and that equals the price the buyer pays. So, mathematically, we can figure these two numbers out. It's not that difficult. You have your equations here and here, and now with some specificity, given demand functions and supply functions, you can calculate these actual prices, and of course that's rather useful to have that specific information.